Excellent. Well, thank you. It's really nice to be here. I'm incredibly proud of the work that Interface does around the world every day. So when I'm given the opportunity to come and share what we're doing on behalf of the 5,000 people that work with us around the world, I'm really delighted to do so, and it's always a really gratifying experience. So I do talk a lot about what we're doing at Interface to other businesses, to business schools, to business forums. And over the last 5 years, the conversation has really been about, why don't you tell us what the business case is for sustainability? Give us the business case for sustainability. And I would sort of ask you guys to consider that question in reverse as a frame for our conversation today, which is not what is the business case for doing sustainability, but what is the business case for doing business unsustainably? I mean, right? What the hell is the business case for running your company in a way that damages oceans, threatens sort of life on Earth, has lasting impacts on human health, habitat, ecosystem? I mean, what is the real business case for running a company in a way that damages the biosphere and threatens everything that we depend on for our life? I mean, I think that's the question. And so, that's the frame that our company thinks about when we approach this. And so the question isn't what is the business case, the question is why aren't we holding all businesses to the standard of achieving profitability in a way that still maintains this connection that acknowledges the reality of our reliance on a healthy biosphere. So I think that's the frame I want us to all think about. Our company believes that's really the only way to do business. And I want to spend just a few short minutes before I share some examples about what we're doing. I want to tell you kind of why we're doing it and how it started at Interface. And it really started with our founder, Ray Anderson. He built this company from scratch the year I was born in 1973. So I'm aging myself. But he built the company from scratch with a really cool idea to introduce modular carpet into the commercial office markets in 1970. So it is literally just this idea of we make carpet and then we cut it into squares. And we were really capitalizing on this idea that was happening in the 70s. And for those of you who have lived through that, this is sort of a nice blast from the past. What your hair used to look like, what you all used to look like. And really he was capitalizing on this idea of modularity and bringing an entirely new business into the commercial office space. And now it's really expanded everywhere, healthcare, hospitality. And it looks a lot more like this nowadays. But it was really launched at its heart as very small, very innovative. The first 10 years of the business, it grew exponentially. And we really built the market, both in the US and overseas, for this idea of modularity and flexibility. And then, about 10 years after that, in the early 1990s, we had a really interesting experience happen. We lost a huge job in California. It was one of the first green buildings that existed way before LEED, way before the US Green Building Council. And it was a really innovative project that was being undertaken in California. And we were trying to get the business, and it was very high profile. And the green consultant that the company had hired to run the project was asking our salespeople, I get your product, I understand how it works, I get the flexibility, I get the less waste, we like that. But what is your company doing for the environment? This is a green project. And our sales guys did not know how to answer that. They'd never been asked that question. Ray didn't know how to answer it. And when we lost the job, he got very concerned about our ability not to answer what a customer was asking. And he just wouldn't let it go. And I think the thing that really bothered him was not only couldn't we answer a question that one of our customers really cared about, we'd never even thought about it. We'd never even had that question ourselves. We were so disconnected from what our customers were thinking that we'd never even thought about it. We'd never even asked, what impacts does this company have on the planet? What about the raw materials that we're using to make these products? What are those impacts? We never even thought about it. And he couldn't let it go. So like a conventional CEO, he created a task force and said, we're never going to be in a situation where we can't answer this question again. So I'm going to do what sort of every company CEO does. I'm going to get a bunch of guys, and in those days it was all guys. I'm going to get a bunch of guys together, we're going to create a task force, and we're going to figure this out as interface. So he gets all the guys together, they don't know how to answer it. So they turn it around on him and say, we're going to dig into this. But as the founder of the company, you need to show up and give us your environmental vision. That's how we're going to kick it off. You're going to give us this environmental vision, and then we're going to get to work. And he's told me many times, and if any of you had ever seen him speak, he tells this story. You know, I drug my feet. I did not want to give that speech. I had no idea what to say. I had never thought about it. The company had been in business by then for about 20 years, and I never even thought of it. So I didn't want to give that speech. And a couple of weeks before this speech, he commits to do it. He's starting to sweat. He's reading all sorts of stuff about the environment. And a salesperson manages to give him this book. How many people have read this book in this room? Fantastic. It is a really amazing book still. And if you don't know anything about Paul Hawken, he himself now is this amazing author, environmentalist, thought leader, but he's also a business guy. He also started one of the first organic markets in Boston. He also created a business, Smith & Hawken, which he subsequently sold. So he has this interesting foot in both worlds. And he created this book where, you know, in my summary, it kind of does 2 or 3 things. It details a lot of the damage that we've done to the planet and the biosphere. It squarely frames up where that trend is heading, not in a good direction. And then it gives you some hope at the end by saying, but there's kind of one institution that's powerful enough, nimble enough, innovative enough, has enough money to really get in there and fix it, and that's business. And so that really resonated with our founder. At a time when he was looking for a vision, and I think frankly looking for a little hope, and looking for a connection to, as a CEO or as an industrialist, where do we fit? He read this book. He had what he describes as an epiphany, a fundamental change of perspective about the role of business, the role of our business, and where we should be going. So he showed up to that kickoff, and he delivered this vision. And he admits now, I basically stole half this language from Paul Hawken's book, and I give him huge credit for it. I borrowed shamelessly from it, and you know, I delivered this, and he stunned our people. Literally, for an hour after he said it, our people sat in the room and said, I don't think our business is going to be able to do this. This is crazy. This is unrealistic. We'll never be able to do it. It's going to kill the business. But we like it. There's something kind of interesting there. What if we could do that? Wouldn't that be amazing? So I think what's really interesting about that is this started for us with the fundamental recognition of a business guy sort of getting, we are connected to the bigger biosphere. Business has a role here, and the way we have to operate together is very different than the way we've been operating the last 20 years. So he refocused the entire company around this vision. And, you know, to Keith's point earlier, you know, this isn't an eco-efficiency approach. This is not about managing our carbon footprint. It is really about doing business in a way first that lessens every environmental impact we have. So in the last 15 years, we've been very focused on the do less bad. Control what we are doing, because we've made some really dumb decisions in the last 20 years. But we're starting to sort of work our way towards a model of do more good. And what's been really fantastic is the best ideas for that do more good aren't coming from outside experts that we're hiring, they're coming from our internal employees. And at the end, I'm going to share 2 sort of really interesting examples of where we think we're starting to frame up what it means as a business to do more good, but we still have a lot of work to do to sort of be less bad. So this is just a snapshot of where we are. And I think I only used 2 charts in this whole presentation. So, you know, the interesting point here is it's taken us 15 years near 19 years to get to some of these, and for example, recycled and bio-based materials being half of all the total raw materials we use to make products. We are a product manufacturer. That is what we do. That is our biggest footprint. So for us, cracking that in the early days started out very incrementally. Started out with small percentages. We're not vertical. We don't make our own nylon. So for a company that's quite small in a carpet industry that's quite big, where our biggest footprint is nylon, what that has taken is literally convincing our supply chain to make the change for us, showing them a different model. So it really meant doing things like bringing those suppliers close to interface, having summits, having Ray show up and deliver that vision, and say to the suppliers, this is where we're going. By the way, whichever one of you gets there first, meaning delivers us recycled content, partners with us to bring back products and recycle them and incorporate them into your raw materials, we're going to award you with the most business. So we saw this play out about 5 years ago when we felt we were just getting incremental progress on the supply chain, and we convened our two big steering suppliers. And we said, quite frankly to them, we're not moving fast enough. We have a goal to get to 100% recycled or bio-based raw materials by 2020, and you guys are the biggest barrier. You've done some incremental stuff, we've made some investments, you've made some investments, but now we expect a big process leap. We expect big changes, and we're going to give the lion's share of our business to whoever will do that with us. And one company stepped up. They invested in a recycling plant. Their name is Aquafil. They now get the majority of our nylon business. And it used to be a third, a third, a third, and now they are sort of the majority supplier, and they are a big reason that the number has gone to 50% because they supply us with 100% recycled nylon that goes into products. And there's a little bit of business risk there because we have a lot of our eggs in this basket, in one basket. But we felt it was kind of the best way to make a commitment to these suppliers and to show them there's a real business benefit to doing business this way. So I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about what are some of the benefits that it's really brought to Interface, both from a sort of nuts and bolts business perspective, but also really over the last 20 years transforming the business into being a more innovative, more creative, more resilient organization that has really given a sense of purpose to the people who work there. And so the vast majority of the employees that we have work in a very different environment as this. It's dark, it's loud, they're working on machinery to make carpet tiles. So if we can get someone who does the night shift in the tufting department in Northern Ireland excited about sustainability, we can change the culture of the organization in a way that fundamentally gives us a higher performing business. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of some of the nuts and bolts, and I love this picture because it really to me shows that sort of making that connection on a real level with employees and driving that. This is an example of one of our employees bragging about the level of edge waste that their facility has gotten down to. In the early days of starting, it would have been right here. And now we sort of have competitions all over the world to say who can get their edge waste down to a half an inch, a quarter of an inch, an eighth of an inch. And so how did we really do this? Kind of what's the point? The first point really is, for us, we needed an entry point to bringing this big vision down to a manufacturing organization. And a lot of organizations start where we started with waste. Is the fundamental entry point, do less bad, waste less money, very easy concept for everyone in the organization to understand. So we created a waste prevention program. We called it Quest. And I think we did two things here very smartly. We broadly defined the category of waste, not just to be stuff like this in a conventional manufacturing environment, but anything that doesn't go to a customer. Off-quality falls in that. Things that come back returned from customers falls in that. And from a sustainability perspective, we even defined non-renewable energy as a waste. And we rolled out a very aggressive program and a training program at all levels of the organization to say, this is where we're going, this is the broad definition, and two really powerful things happened. We realized really quickly that all the best ideas existed way below the management levels. And we created a system of teams that were employee-led that drove progress. And not only did it capture the best ideas, it kind of democratized this process. It took a lot of the conventional manufacturing hierarchy out of that and sort of opened up the space for people at all levels of the organization to bring ideas. So exactly what Leith was talking about, but with no strategy on our end. We literally walked our way into that. Had we had some of Leith's work 15 years ago, we probably could have gotten there a lot faster. But it's very interesting to sort of finally see it articulated and say, okay, we can sort of reflect on that and say that's a really interesting example of where we kind of parted some of the branches, put a little sunlight down below, and started harvesting those great ideas and getting people really connected. So I think this democratization was really important, but it sort of also gave them a deeper sense of purpose. You know, the people who were allowed to participate in that team as tufting operators got new opportunities within the organization. Not only did their ideas get heard, they were now on sort of a different team where they had a different level of leadership. They now had a higher level of interaction with some of our senior managers. We used to give awards to people every year, and twice a year we took them to really great locations like Bermuda or the Bahamas and sat them down with the senior guys in the business and had them present their success. And it was a really fantastic way to sort of drive that. So you had the direct business benefit, which is we saved a bunch of money. And we don't love to report this publicly because we think it's kind of a weird number, but we have a $480 million number in our head of the waste that we've avoided since we started this program. And that's really significant for the bottom line of the business. And the reason we don't sort of say, we saved $480 million as the program shifts and it flows and ebbs and, you know, it might be 400. You know, we've sort of been able to say over the years on an annual basis, this is what we saved in the program annually, but the program slightly changed. So that's a number internally that we're very proud of, and it's also a number that we've gone back and been able to show that in the first 10 years of focusing on sustainability, that's where we got the money. And it gave us a little bit of a breathing space, and it gave our executive team the ability to think a little bit more long-term when traditionally they hadn't and weren't comfortable thinking that way because there was this perceived pot of money. It was a sort of a very powerful way to us to make the argument that we could go ahead and invest in technologies, for example, to bring products back, to recycle the backings, because we had this pot of money. And it was a sort of really interesting way for us to make that first leap. The second example that I want to talk about, sort of a little bit more focused directly on innovation and competitive pressure and positioning in the market, are two examples that we actually got to using biomimicry. So I'm not going to talk about the process of that, but know that they were inspired by this idea of looking to nature for solutions. And we went there because we had started to challenge our design team in the early days to get on board with sustainability, which as a designer means dematerialization, you know, make the same products with less stuff, think more thoughtfully about designing things that can be more efficiently manufactured. And they were just stumped. You know, they just didn't know where to go. So one of the ideas in the early days was our founder brought together some leading thinkers, including Paul Hawken, who wrote the book. And he explicitly reached outside of the organization and said, look, we're humble enough to tell you we have no idea how to do this. We have a huge vision. We don't know how to do this. He wrote a letter to Paul Hawken and said, I was greatly influenced by your book. Would you help us kind of figure it out at Interface? And Paul started pulling other people into our organization, and Janine Benius was one of them. So we made this connection around biomimicry. And sort of, I think the really interesting case study here is we developed a product using a biomimetic approach, and we created and launched this new design, which quickly sort of led into an entire product category. And the really interesting thing to know about this is that it is a whole new way of thinking about how we would design a tile. So if you look at sort of the carpet tiles on the left, you'll see that there's this variety amongst the pattern. And that's the lesson we took from nature. We literally sent our designers out into the forest and said, observe how nature would design a floor. And they came back with this really interesting functional observation, which is the one thing that nature does way differently than we do is they have this lack of uniformity. There's a lot of beauty, but it's a little chaotic. It's sort of not uniform, and that's in direct opposition to how we design products. It's the old, Henry Ford model. It's the factory line model. We make every single thing exactly the same. Very cookie cutter, very the same. So what does that mean? That means everything, because we're just putting it into this system. We're not putting it into sort of exactly the same thing. So that's sort of the concept of mergeable dialogues. And it also sort of reduced installation waste. Typically when we're installing a room where everything is the same, we have about a 4% waste rate because we've got to sort of work around corners, you've got to make sure sort of the pattern lines up and things are exactly the same. With this, we took that from 4% to about 1.5%. And it was quicker. So we saw sort of all these amazing benefits to the business just in terms of cost saving. And this is one of only 2 graphs that I'm using. But you sort of get the point, which is the third line down, installation waste is what I'm talking about. We're about 3.8% for a typical product that would be kind of more cookie cutter, but the I2 non-directional products takes it down to 1.5%. Still fantastic because you can see the other 2 categories are the conventional kind of broadloom or rolled carpet. So you can see the real impact if we're competing for, let's say, a job, or talking to a design firm about how quickly can we install it, how much waste is there going to be, are you a company that's really focused on waste? We can actually give you a real metric about the difference in terms of the installation. So it's a really revolutionary, and for each of that, but using that square footage that we're using, which is the second column down, sort of how do we quantify the benefit in manufacturing? It's about $25,000 that we don't throw away because of off quality, because we just eliminate that. So if you multiply that across all of the millions of square yards that we sell a year, it becomes pretty significant. So that's sort of a specific example there. A second one that also originated in biomimicry, our design teams were really struggling with this idea of how do we get off of glue? In many cases, we have to glue down the carpet tiles. And the immediate impact on the humans that work in those spaces are the volatile organic compounds that come out of glue and the impact on indoor air quality. But it's also installation time. It's also the cost of creating the glue and the packaging. So how do we sort of just move it in a completely different environment? And we started out looking at biomimicry and looking at actually how geckos cling, how nature glues, how nature sticks itself. And while that sort of didn't immediately give us a solution, what we realized is we were asking the wrong question. Nature actually doesn't glue, nature uses gravity. So why don't we actually get smart and use gravity? And our innovation sort of went in an entirely different direction. And instead of gluing down the carpet, we created something that's right here. And I probably have a better slide to show it, which is something that's essentially the size of a Post-it note that has an adhesive on one side. So instead of this ridiculous idea that we had and the industry has had for the last 25 years to take a perfectly great product and glue it down, we just said, why don't we actually stick them to each other using much less adhesive, and actually they can use their own weight and gravity to stick to the floor. So it was this really interesting idea of how is our focus on sustainability, the need to sort of think about air quality, the need to think about the impacts of glue, how will that drive an innovation? And how does that change the way we think and change the way we look at solutions? And this is sort of a great example for two reasons. The first is it really started to show our organization that because of sustainability, we're embracing new ideas and sources of innovation that are way far outside of our company, that are really very valid and inherently sustainable. If you look to nature for solutions, you're typically going to find something that isn't a heat, beat, and treat, lots of toxic chemicals, lots of heat, lots of processing. You're going to find things that self-assemble at room temperature and that don't take a lot of energy and that use waste as food. So it's inherently space where we never were looking before until we adopted this sustainability mission. And in this example, it's been a really sort of dramatic competitive advantage because not only was there a cost savings for us There was a huge environmental impact savings. It's about 90% difference when you install a floor with tactiles than when you installed it with glue. In terms of, the VOCs are almost zero, and I can't say zero because there's no test that can detect between 0 and almost 0, but it's 0, but the lawyers are like, you can't say 0, it could be so minuscule. So it's almost 0. Impact on VOCs. The process of making a tactile versus making the glue is about 90% lower environmental impact. So the sourcing of that, the packaging, the processing of the glue was 90% higher than this. So huge contribution to our environmental footprint. It was less expensive. It gave us a huge competitive advantage because in certain jobs where designers or individuals didn't want to have glue, they wanted to have a floor that was quickly replaceable. Maybe it was a job that we needed to do really quickly. These install a lot faster. They're much easier to flip out. They're much easier to take out. And in a really interesting twist that we weren't thinking about, they allow us to bring back products and process them for recycling in a much better way than before because we're not washing off glue, we're not ripping them off the floor, we're literally picking them up and pulling them apart. So here's sort of an example from a financial perspective, and I always look at the first 3 years of when we launch because that's usually sort of the big spike. But if you sort of look at the idea of from a sustainability perspective, there's an environmental impact, there's an impact to the business, there's an innovation impact, but there's also a financial impact. So, and this is a really fantastic example because when we started in 2006 and launched in 2007 and it really hit the market in 2008, that was not a great time for the business world. It was not a great time for the sales of commercial carpet in any part of the world. So it's also a really great example of sort of innovations in the pipeline coming from sustainability, derived from a very different place, which can contribute to the business, even in times when we're seeing sales sort of take a much different approach. So I just wanted to share that really quickly. The next thing I want to talk about is the more intangible stuff. And when I start to sort of go down this path with businesses, there's this conversation, this expectation of sort of just give us your numbers. Hang on, I'm going to do a time check. Perfect. There's this sort of sense of just give us your numbers and talk to us sort of about how the business is really benefiting. But if you sort of look at the conversation we've been having, I always summarize it as saying costs are down, innovation is up, and there's no shortage of ideas in our business that come from places we never would have expected them to. So that's I2, that's tactiles, that's the fundamental focus on waste. When we talk about a healthy, high-performing organization, we want operational excellence. And I think the Quest program and the programs we have to continually challenge our factories to get to zero footprint provides that constant focus on progress, on excellence, in a way that really deeply engages others in the organization. So I think we've done something very right there. You also need a strong innovation pipeline. You need really committed people. And this is sort of the last thing I want to touch on before I share the two final examples. And this idea of how can sustainability impact others in your organization. And I just one quick example here. This is the guy that I aspire to have in every one of my factories. He actually works in our LaGrange manufacturing unit in Georgia. And sort of this is the kind of person that we aspire to have. We want to create this sense of ownership and purpose. So we've been at it about 21 years now, and I recently surveyed about 10% of the total population of employees at Interface for a project I'm working on about the next vision of sustainability. And I asked them, are you connected to this sustainability mission at all? And if you are, why are you? And the vast majority of them were connected. Out of the about 500 people that we surveyed, not one single person said to me that they weren't. They were connected for different reasons, but the top 3 reasons were, I could summarize it by people saying, because I come to work to make more than carpet. This job is about doing more than just making carpet. Some people say I come to work to save the world, because we're protecting the planet. And that to me is sort of the lifeblood. We can talk about cost savings, we can talk about innovation, we can talk about all of that. But unless you have this foundation, and until you create, I think, this sense of purpose in your company, you don't really get to deliver on the amazing performance that you see as a result of that. So it was really interesting to see that, and I'm happy to share those survey responses. It always blows us away. And the summary there is it creates this really interesting sense of ownership and purpose that I think motivates our employees in a way that just showing up to do efficient work, just making great products, just being a market leader would never do. So I think that's really interesting. And as we move to kind of the last part, I want to share 2 examples of where we think we're going. And it really is for us about making this shift from being I'm going to skip that. It's making this shift from being an organization that does bad to an organization that does more good. And this is a great example that's come out of this really engaged culture. And I have a lot of slides here, but I just want to share this and you can look at it after. In really quick summary, this is a program that we've put in place to change the way our supply chain operates. And we approached it by asking ourselves, it's been fantastic that our suppliers have been able to do this recycled content, but what's the next step? And how do we show them a model and make it attractive that will actually change the way we can do business? So this is a program that we created where we put together local communities in the Philippines who collect fishing nets that are abandoned in their communities. And these fishing nets obviously have huge environmental impacts on the oceans as they sort of remain there, sort of killing everything in their wake. And there's a tremendous environmental impact on particularly those local populations where the nets are because they're typically reliant on that resource. Subsistence fishermen or they're fishing to provide animals into the tropical aquarium trade. So we set up this model where we said, we know that our suppliers need to understand the value of getting more recycled content in. The nylon in these fishing nets is the exact sort of nylon we use in carpets. So how do we sort of take a waste in a place where it's having an impact on the marine environment and on the local population and turn that on its head? And how do we create a benefit? So we launched a program with the Zoological Society of London where we set up a business model to use local communities to connect and process the nets, to send them to our supplier Aquafil, to have them be reprocessed, go into recycled yarn that we can use to make into our products. And for us, it was a way to say to our supply chain, it's great that you do recycled content, but as we move out of this do less bad, which is recycled content, and we think about how do we do more good in the world, what are those additional environmental and social benefits we should be thinking about? And let's just try something. To Lee's point, let's try something and see if it works. It might not work, but let's have the framework going in that this is a model that is about doing more good. And I will say in this room only that they were very skeptical. And they were worried about, well, what are the fishing nets going to look like coming from a bunch of local communities in the Philippines? How are they going to be cleaned? How are they going to be baled? How are they going to be processed? What will the quality be? How are we going to be able to ship them to us? Because their perspective would be we could also partner with a large commercial fishing operation as a yarn supplier and directly get that into our recycling stream. And we said, let's give it a chance. Let's try it out. This is a model we're working on. And we have completely changed their mind the second they started to get fantastic PR benefits from being part of this program. And when their peers and people at green building conferences stood up and gave their CEO standing ovations when he talked about this project, fundamentally changed how they think about it. So that, to us, really is an example of how do you sort of try things out, but how do you also recognize that as a business you don't have to solve everything? How do we move towards more of a network model? How do we connect those people, those organizations, those that have enthusiasm? If you think about what Leith was saying, think about creating a bigger adaptive operating system that is sort of not just those super connected people in your organization, but going outside of that and saying, how do we use the skills of someone at an environmental organization? How do we use someone in a different place in the supply chain? So we call it networks. It's a fantastic example of where we think we're going. And we don't have time to do that, but I'm going to share one more quick second idea. So how does that really translate to a manufacturing environment? So this is a partnership we're doing right now with the Biomimicry Institute and Janine Benius, who I've spoken about. And the idea is, how would we imagine our manufacturing sites, our factories, as also being positive contributors? So it's one thing to sort of have this conversation with networks and look at how might we have a more inclusive model from a product perspective. But we have a huge amount of, we have 7 factories around the world that have huge footprints in local communities. What might this look like for that factory? So we're looking very seriously at something that Janine and her organization have developed, where they measure the ecosystem services of a highly functioning local ecosystem, and that becomes the model. So what that local ecosystem is doing in terms of sequestering carbon, storing water, providing habitat, supporting pollinators. And we've asked ourselves, could that be a model that we could strive to? Right now our factories are in a model where we're saying 0 footprint. And I've talked about the engagement that's driven and how we've implemented that, and that will always be a focus for us. But that's not net positive. It's not generous. It's not giving back. It's just doing what's bad. So we're really trying at this phase to identify what does more good look like from a factory footprint perspective. And this is a model that we're exploring. It's very new. We're doing it actually in our Minto, Australia manufacturing plant because it's the newest. So there are lots of local ecosystems that we're looking at that I'm sure Leith is familiar with, where we're measuring what they do, and then we're asking ourselves, could that be our standard? So there's a couple of really interesting articles on it, GreenBiz, Wired, that you can read, because I don't have time to go into it, I'm sorry. But I just wanted to share with you sort of that as a business, how we're trying to really create the framework and the measurement around what's the next step to net positive. So I kind of want to close with this. So in August of 2011, we lost Ray. And, sorry. And the 5,000 of us in the company are incredibly committed to deliver that original vision. For him, for us, for our families, for you, for the planet, right? And I think, you know, for us, there's a big example that we set, and I think it's a big footprint and an example for the business world that sometimes is diminished by people saying, well, you know, this was the founder who drove it, they're really small, we are publicly traded, even though people don't know that. We do have shareholders, we do have a board of directors that's very focused on profit, but we're only 5,000 people. So this idea of sort of, to me, if we can get this far, if a bunch of guys in LaGrange, Georgia, in Minto, Australia, in Bangkok, Thailand, if we can get this far, any company can do it. Trust me. Anyone can do it. But let's not go that route. I mean, the people in this room have the opportunity to touch the next generation of business leaders. You all do. Let's show them the different model. You know, let's sort of show them the way to do that right. So the next generation of entrepreneurs, I think, let's make that connection between what it means to be in business and do that in a way that benefits the biosphere. Let's show them that there are some examples that you can make money, you can drive innovation, you can create this amazingly engaged culture, and you can make money doing it. And sort of, you guys, I think, have some of the best opportunity to do that. I don't touch those students, we don't see those students, but anything that we can do to support you in that, we're happy to do. So, you know, in closing, I think we've provided some books. So the last ask I have here is share the story. Share the story with your students, with people that you do business with your next door neighbor, and have a discussion about that. And see what comes out of it. And feel free to reach out to me, to send us ideas, to send us comments, to ask us for support. Because this sort of really is, if we don't all get behind this, you know, the next 20 years for all of us are going to be a very different place in the world. So, thank you. Thanks for your time.